Drop made a pair of wireless headphones with THX technology built in. Let's check them out. Like the Model T Ford, you can have the Drop Pandas in any color you want, as long as it's black. But anyway, let's start off with the ergonomics of these. They have a kind of rubber head pad, which is not majorly soft, but did the job. The only thing I don't like about it is this kind of rubber, after about 5 years or however long, becomes kind of, it deteriorates and becomes sticky, and then the whole thing becomes unpleasant. And I've had a few devices like that, so I'm kind of not really confident about the longevity of these headphones. But that's kind of par for the course these days when you buy any headphones. I've had Sony gear that's like that too, and I'm sure my my Sony noise cancelling headphones are going to have similar issues. But anyway, at least it doesn't have that kind of rubberized coating a lot of stuff has, which really does deteriorate after 5 years and become awful. But otherwise, you've got a mixture of, plastic, bit of metal, more plastic and more plastic, but it's, they have, metal hinges in there, and so, it's kind of all strong enough and should do the job for as long as they're not abused. I mean, they're not going to survive like V motors will. Other than that, they have nice plush ear pads, and I can get up to, the first joint of my finger in there. They could go quite deep. And unless you have crazy large ears, I think they're going to fit fine. I mean, I found them very comfortable. I didn't wear them for like many hours, but I did listen to them for maybe about an hour, and I was quite happy with that. Now, other than that, well, we have the nice thing I like about it, and the thing that some people don't like about these, is that they have a single button, and that's it. So, for example, you usually have buttons for the power, and then play forward and backwards and all of that, and it's all in one button here. Pressing it directly in, you'll press for power on and power off, and then you have a super long press for power on and pairing, and then you have volume up and down and backwards and forwards, all in one kind of little joystick thing. And it sticks out enough, you can see if I just tilt it there, that you can easily fill up and the side of the headphone, and you'll know which button you're operating because there's only one, and I like that. In terms of input and that, you have USB for charging and input from the computer. Now that is a USB-C cable, and it comes with, as you see, a USB-C to USB-C cable, and you can use an A to C cable, which confused some people out there, either with an adapter or what have you. Now the problem with the USB-C is that this cable could be USB 2 only, it could be USB 3, USB 3.1, could be Thunderbolt. Well, it's not going to be Thunderbolt, it's too thin obviously. And there are a whole bunch of little configuration options for USB, which means not all cables are created equal. So there is the issue I came up with, say, with the Dali IO6 headphones, is when I wanted to upgrade the headphones, instead of grabbing the cable out of the case, the default one, I grabbed whatever one I had on hand, and it wouldn't work for upgrading, and I had to find the default one. So that's the only kind of issue with USB-C. While everything is kind of unified into one connector, it means you have a lot of different kinds of cables and the confusion, which is not much to indicate. Now, connecting it to my computer, which is an iMac, I found that it would allow input of, your standard CD quality, 16-bit 44.1, but it only goes up to 48 kilohertz. So if you, for some reason, want to listen to high res through these, well, at least through the USB, you're not going to be able to, because it will just have to be downsampled to 48 kilohertz. But I mean, for most people at this kind of price range, high res is not going to be something you're going to really care about. I mean, the limitations of these are going to be the driver, but let's talk about that later. Anyway, the other input is a 3.5mm 4-pole input, and that's where your headset comes in if you get the optional $49 headset. This is what you get for $49. Plus this adapter to allow the 4-pin connection to work with a standard microphone and headphone socket on your computer or sound card or whatever. $49 for this. Well, it does come with a volume control on the slider here, which does the job from 0 to full, and a microphone off switch. And interesting thing, it's keyed, so it has a fairly narrow plug, and you plug it in, if I get it with a camera view, thus, and then it stays fixed, and you just bend the microphone as you need. And the only thing I don't like about this, apart from the fact that it's $49 is a lot of money for something fairly basic, is that the socket is slightly recessed here. So if you do have a third-party plug or cable, it may not be able to connect due to this slightly recessed nature. I mean, the V-motor ones, which actually I'm using, I have a really long V-motor one, they should work. But if you have some kind of crazy cable with like a big Canair plug on it, not going to happen. So that's the kind of general ergonomics of them. And the next thing, obviously, to talk about is my listening impressions. And this is where life gets way more interesting. Now, normally with a pair of headphones, I'd say, well, this is the sound with different kinds of music, and then I could give my impressions from there. But the thing is, these are programmable, and you can actually upgrade the sound. Now, originally, and it took a while for them to get this organized, because they did it in conjunction with a company called SonarWorks, but they now are, you can actually do a listening test, and it will create a profile for you. But before that, when I first got them, they had a sound signature that was fairly punchy, had good bass, actually had good low bass, which I was surprised, because if I just pop off these earpads for a moment, the actual space available for the kind of driver to exit sound is pretty small. They're 53mm drivers, but that's a pretty small hole there. I wasn't sure how well the bass would come through that. But actually, even given the Silent Sound Spectrum, which is one of my favorite tracks from a guy called Gerald. That's his name. That's his title, his name. From him, which is one of my favorite 50-minute tracks, as it was exactly the amount of time I needed between the time I could use electronic devices after takeoff and before landing when they had to be shut off when I flew to Tokyo. That has some really deep bass, and that rumbled actually through pretty well. And the only problem was the mids and I suppose the treble to a degree were a little bit harsh. And that harsher mid-range was kind of grating, considering these are $400. Well, $3.99, but who's counting $1? And so I was kind of like, it wasn't going to be a really particularly positive review. And then I went and thought, I'll just check and see what any updates are, if anyone's had any issues, that kind of thing, before I do the review. So I went to drop.com and I found out, yes, they'd finally released the SonarWorks software. And the SonarWorks software allows you to, well, what it does basically is you select, they have a series of like short bits of music which repeat over and over again, and then they give you two options, A and B, in each of them. And you say, do you like A better or B better, or is there no difference, or you don't care? And after doing this about a dozen times, it compiles all the data, it sends it to a server, processes it, and sends back a profile, which is stored on the headphones. Now, even after the firmware upgrade and before I did the test, I found that the sound quality had improved and some of that harsh mid-range had disappeared. Now, just to give an example, I did this whole comparison thing with all the Bluetooth headphones I could find that were kind of up to date. The first, Diley IOs, because they're around the same $400 price. They have really good sound. I've got a review of these up, which you can check out. Well, I'll stick a card up. These are the nicest sounding noise-cancelling headphones I've used. And because they're from a hi-fi company, a speaker company, Diley, they have these nice paper cone drivers, which is very rare in headphones these days. And obviously they're from an OEM in China, but they've obviously customized them with their own tuning and drivers, and they don't have a big bassy sound like a lot of noise cancelling, wireless headphones. I mean, Sony looking at you from overdoing the bass and overdoing the warmth, and they're kind of even sounding and actually pretty good for noise cancelling headphones, even if they're not the most fancy, have the most fancy features. Actually, the ones I most like taking on airplanes with me, apart from the fact they're rather bulky. But these had a fair degree of refinement, even when I turned the volume up to the maximum, about 90 dBs average, that I could get them because, European regulations and all that. And these sounded kind of harsh initially, the Pandas. But after the firmware upgrade, suddenly now they're sounding as good as the other noise-cancelling headphones I have. None of that harshness seems to have dropped down a fair bit. Now, still, at loud volumes, the mid-range is going to come forward, and it's not the greatest mid-range you're going to ever hear. But it's no worse than any other wireless noise-cancelling headphones I have, even though these aren't noise-cancelling and probably should sound better. But that being said, after the tuning, I ended up with a kind of slightly U-shaped sound. Now, the SonarWorks software has been famous for being able to get a flat sound out of headphones. So, for example, I had Focal Utopias, and you ran it through the old SonarWorks software, and it would give you flat tuning. And I didn't like it with the Utopias specifically because the sound degradation I could hear, because Utopias are very resolving. I could hear that the processing was degrading the sound slightly, but you could get a genuinely flat tuning, and the effect of that was interesting because a flat tuning made the Utopias, you lost that sense of depth to the sound that they're capable of giving. So EQ can have an interesting effect on your perception of depth and other things, but that's a whole science in itself. But back to the reason I'm talking about this is because the Pandas, you see, when the AB selection thing, they'd often have like a sound, oh, this is kind of obviously like a very flat kind of sound option, would be A maybe, and then a kind of V, slightly, bass boosted, slightly mids pushed back, slightly treble boosted B sound might come up, which I was like, am I going to go for the flat? Am I going to go for the euphonic? No, I'll go for the fun sound with the boosted bass. And I kind of chose in that direction each time when I had a choice between which sounds better. So I chose against having a forward mid-range. And the result was a kind of U-shaped sound, to my perception anyway. I mean, on the app, it just shows you, it's like, the result is flat. It's like, no, obviously it's not. I mean, to my ears, it sounds slightly V-shaped, but I like a slightly V-shaped sound in headphones in general. But I think maybe slightly more U-shaped because the really low bass rumbled through, but the mid bass wasn't so forward. So they sound kind of open and clear, but with the limitation that, stuff that's like hard left in the music is obviously hard left, and stuff that's hard right is hard right. But, stuff in the middle is kind of still a little bit congested and imperfect, but it doesn't have like the unpleasant harshness I didn't like with the initial firmware. So it ended up being, going from a pair of headphones before the upgrade, which I was kind of like, these sound okay sometimes, but like say, let's take a track, say Younger Brother, which is, the guy who does basically half of Spongle. There's a track, All I Need, on one of these albums, and it's got a period where anything like, if there's any harshness in the headphones, it just comes through. And that was kind of harsh and getting grating on these before the firmware upgrade, and it was much more listenable afterwards. And once I did the tuning, it became a really nice track to work with. So that and a guy called Gerald, and I tried my usual round of stuff, but the only thing I noticed, and this I say because I use high-end headphones mostly, I noticed that, the mid-range wasn't as good with the, these, of course, as my higher-end headphones. But still now they were starting to sound closer to a pair of $400 headphones. Now I'm kind of thinking, I actually like listening with these, despite, obviously they're not, the $4,000 headphones I usually use, but they're still actually, now they sounded pretty good. And I've been enjoying listening with them. And another guy, one of my patrons, he had the same thing. He tuned his pair. He'd actually bought a pair in Australia, so he paid way more money. And he tuned them first, and I think he must have tuned towards flat because he said, no, they're kind of average and I regret buying them. And he said, well, I'll give it another go and see what happens after I told him about my impressions, which I'm telling you now. And he tried it again, and he aimed, instead of for flat, aimed for like I did, for a slightly more euphonic tuning. And he said, no, okay, now they sound pretty decent. So he was pretty happy with them afterwards. And, us Aussies aren't the kind of people to kind of overhype stuff, but, now they sound pretty good. And now they're really enjoyable, actually. So now I really like the fact that you can tune these kind of to your preferences using that SonarWorks app. Now it's in beta, however you want to say it, and it was a little bit buggy. For example, it had a couple of issues, and if you sign in using Apple, Facebook, or Google, it doesn't set a password, and you can't set a password on the website. You actually have to. And the app won't allow you if you put in a blank password. I just put a space in there, and it actually let me reset the password. Yay. But it'll store your profile, and it stores it on the headphones. So I don't know how many profiles you can create. I haven't experimented with that. And it's got some other buggy issues, like it won't work with older iPhones, like an iPhone 6 it won't work, which is why I can't show it to you now. And I think the funky setup is really good. So the next thing is, how does it compare with other headphones? So starting with the good old Dalis. Well, the Dalis are fairly reasonably, and I say reasonably because there's no such thing as a true flat tuning, they're fairly more even, as I said, less bass, and fairly even tuning, so they work kind of more with acoustic music, unlike some of the warmer headphones. And I found like this once, after the upgrade, the sound quality was comparable, but the Dalis are obviously noise cancelling. So that's a feature you don't have in the Pandas. And so that's a bit of a difference, and I think the Pandas are more comfortable overall, as the ear pads of these are kind of a little bit not quite as plush, and there's kind of a hard spot under there, whereas you don't find the hard spot in the Pandas for quite a fair way down, and they kind of have a round shape, not quite the best design, but all the same, not too bad. But I think the Pandas, if you don't need noise cancelling, the Pandas are a little bit better. I mean, there is an IO4, which is cheaper, but I think for comfort I'd choose these. Now, we have these FIO EH3 NCs, which are $169, I think they were. I mean, plastic, fantastic, but they're all right. And I've used them on a plane a few times, but they sound kind of dark and mushy and not so great, but they are pretty comfortable, but still have a pretty punchy bass. Not as good sound by far as the Pandas, but again, they're noise cancelling. And they probably come from use the same OEM as Dali does for their noise cancelling bits, because the amount of noise cancelling was similar. Now, up towards the same kind of price range, you have the good old Sonys. The thing about these is these sound really warm, and a lot of people don't like it, and I don't particularly like it, but holy cow, is the noise cancelling awesome. Like, I mean, you turn them on when you're on your ears, and it's like all background sounds just vanish. It's really weird, even just sitting in my room, you just realize how much background sound there is. And they've got that, Sony nice plush pads and same kind of similar design. Well, the Sonys don't need much more explanation, except they fold flat. So you can actually put them in a bag. You can't do this with the Pandas. They're designed to be more portable. These are not really designed to be portable. Now, the thing that really competes with these are these. The Odyssey Mobius. And this is the thing that kind of makes it a little bit tough for the Pandas. 400, and now these are under 400, and you can even get a version now which has a low latency wireless connection for gaming. And you have the 3D mode, and you have the microphone that works with with Wi-Fi, and you have all these features like the different tuning modes for different gaming and what have you, all this stuff in here. Take this mic, boom mic, if you plug it in to the Pandas, it cuts off the Wi-Fi. It will just not work, it just shuts it off. And you can't use it with the USB either. So you're stuck, essentially. You can only use it in wired mode, and that's what you get for you paying almost $50 extra. These, you get everything in the kitchen sink and more. And the thing about also the 3D mode, I mean, as far as headphones go, they don't sound particularly good. They don't sound particularly spectacular just in the normal non-3D mode. But when you turn on 3D mode, they're great for watching stuff on YouTube. Just people's random videos. You get the whole sense of the atmosphere going on there. And, the sound tuning, well, they have a choice of flat, or the musical listening one is pretty good. It's a bit on the warm side. I don't mind that. And, they're good headphones for what you get. They get so much. And the 3D tracking is just great. If you're a gamer, I mean, it's fantastic. So that's the thing, is that the only thing that's kind of really challenging about saying, oh yeah, these are great, is $400 or $399, and then you got to pay the extra $49 for the mic, so $448. That's getting into serious territory. If they were like about $100 cheaper, I'd say absolutely. Yeah, if you don't need the noise cancelling or all the gaming stuff with the Odyssey headphones. Yeah, it's just maybe the price is a bit high. And, if you don't need closed back headphones, and the isolation, incidentally, was okay but not great. Knocks down the high pitch sound somewhat, but still not fantastic. Then you could just buy a pair of Sundaras and a mod mic. I mean, honestly, you can get those show up for $350, and then you get a mod mic. I don't remember how much mod mics cost, but still, that's the only issue where things are coming up. And longevity as usual. So I really do like the Pandas now that they've upgraded stuff. I'm only just a little bit of a head scratcher on that price overall. But, if you do break out for them, they are entertaining and I think good headphones now. And with the sound tuning, I think in this kind of price range, a bit of sound tuning, EQ or whatever, makes a good positive difference to the headphones. In the high end, when you start playing with EQ, like I played with SonarWorks stuff, with the Utopias, and I could hear the sound degradation of processing. That doesn't work so well. In this kind of range, I'm in favor of EQing because of the benefit it can make, and it seemed to have improved kind of the slight mid-range harshness by pushing the mids back a bit in these. So even when you turn up the volume, push the mids up. If you don't know anything about head-related transfer function, as you get louder and louder, the mids get louder faster than do the bass and the treble. So you notice the mid-range more as you go louder, and that's where the harshness would come in. Incidentally, an extra thing. After the firmware upgrade, I noticed a few people had an issue with the volume not being as loud. Now, I tried it through USB, using Rune, which is playback software. And it has, when you have connect a USB DAC, it has three options. You can either have the volume control by Rune, or you can have a fixed volume, which just locks the volume at 100%, or you can have the volume device volume, so it actually uses the volume control inside whatever device you have. Now I logically set, oh, it's got to be the device volume because this has its own volume control. And then everything was really quiet and I couldn't adjust the volume. And I was like, what's going on? So I thought, well, let me try something. Let me set fixed volume because it's not going to affect the volume control inside the electronics here. And then it worked. And then suddenly the volume control worked and Roon recognized the volume adjustments on here. So it was kind of odd. So if you do have that issue, try fiddling around with the volume options for if you use USB, fiddle around with the options to see what's going on. Or I suppose maybe wireless as well. You want to try maybe max the see if they're upping the volume. I don't know what's going to happen in Windows, but maybe try different playback software and see if you can lock the volume, use a fixed volume option so that the pandas control the volume properly and then you'll get a proper volume balance. So, Drop Panda, thanks very much to Drop for sending me these. And of course, before you go, thanks to everyone who has been supporting these videos. Now, people whose names you see popping up on screen, they can ask me questions anytime and they can bug me as much as they like. All in exchange, it's like buying me a coffee once in a while. And you can get to join and get to see the impressions I have of these and help me out on my making these videos and join in a little community of supporters and get buying advice. And I'd love to help you out if you just help me out a little bit in exchange. And make sure that you buy the right gear for what you need and don't buy the wrong gear, which could save you more than a couple of bucks. And thanks to everyone who's been doing that. It's made a big difference and made me being able to continue doing this in the future. So as always, thanks for watching and I look forward to seeing you online.